Let me tell you about the day the galaxy's most feared predator species had a complete meltdown over 3 missing toddlers. And no, I'm not talking about humans this time. The Krillian Empire had spent the last 2 centuries terrorizing pretty much everyone within a 50-light-year radius. Picture 7-foot-tall bipedal crocodiles with anger management issues and military technology that could glass a planet before breakfast. Their battle cry roughly translates to, "We will feast on your entrails while your young watch in terror," which honestly sounds way more intimidating in their native tongue of clicks and hisses. So naturally, when 3 Krillian cubs went missing from the high-security nursery aboard Confederation Station Omega-7, everyone assumed we were about to witness the kind of galactic incident that would make the history books. Assuming there was anyone left to write them. Commander Vex Thornscale stood 8 feet tall, even when he wasn't trying to look intimidating, which he absolutely was at this particular moment. His scales had shifted to that lovely shade of murder red that Krillins get when they're deciding which limb to tear off first. The guy had personally conquered 14 star systems, and his idea of diplomacy was offering his enemies a 5-second head start before he started shooting. But right now, this apex predator was pacing back and forth in the station's security office like a nervous parent at a school play. Because those weren't just any cubs that had vanished. They belonged to Supreme War Chief Grimjaw the Merciless, who had specifically entrusted them to Vex's care while she was off obliterating a rebel fleet somewhere in the Outer Rim. "Explain to me again," Vex growled at Officer Blunt, the station's security chief, who had earned his name through decades of spectacular incompetence. "How 3 cubs simply vanished from a room with biometric locks, motion sensors, and armed guards." A portly, nervous little man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe shuffled through his electronic tablet with trembling fingers. "Well, sir, the thing is, we're not entirely sure they actually vanished per se. More like, well, they seem to have wandered off during nap time." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees as Vex's pupils contracted to slits. "Wandered off. The cubs are quite, energetic for their age," squeaked Dr. Pip Squeakerton, the station's xenobiologist. She was a tiny woman who looked like a strong breeze might knock her over, but she'd studied more alien species than anyone else in the sector. Unfortunately, her expertise didn't seem to extend to reading the room. At 18 months, Krillian young are naturally curious explorers. Their hunting instincts are just beginning to develop, and they often— "I know what my species young do," Vex interrupted, his voice carrying that special quality that made seasoned warriors reconsider their life choices. "What I want to know is how they got past your security to do it." That's when Jake Morrison decided to make the worst-timed entrance in galactic history. "Hey, sorry I'm late," came a cheerful voice from the doorway. "Had to finish fixing the air circulation system in Section C. You know how those intake vents get when nobody cleans them for—" Jake stopped mid-sentence when he noticed that everyone in the room was staring at him like he'd just announced his plans to juggle antimatter. He was exactly what you'd expect from a human maintenance worker. Average height, permanently grease-stained coveralls, and the kind of easygoing smile that suggested he hadn't quite grasped the severity of whatever situation he'd just walked into. "Oh," Jake said, glancing between Vex's homicidal glare and Officer Blunt's nervous twitching. "This is about those cute little lizard kids, isn't it?" The silence that followed could have been measured in geological epochs. "Cute, little, lizard, kids." Vex repeated each word like he was tasting something particularly unpleasant. "You refer to the offspring of the Krillian Empire as cute little lizard kids." "Well, yeah," Jake shrugged, apparently immune to the concept of mortal terror. "I mean, they were adorable, all big eyes and tiny claws, making those little chirping sounds. Reminded me of the baby alligators I used to see back home in Florida." Dr. Squeakerton's tablet clattered to the floor. Officer Blunt made a sound like a deflating balloon, and Vex, for the first time in his military career, found himself completely at a loss for words. "You saw them," Vex finally managed. "When?" "About 3 hours ago, maybe 4. They were playing in the air ducts near the nursery. The little rascals had figured out how to pop the grate covers off." Jake scratched his head, still blissfully unaware that he was casually chatting with a creature that could bench press a hover tank. "I was going to mention it to someone, but they seemed to be having such a good time exploring. Didn't want to get them in trouble, you know." "In trouble," Vex repeated flatly. "I mean, kids will be kids, right? Even alien kids. They're just curious about the world around them." Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "Although I gotta say, they moved pretty fast for toddlers. One second they were right there next to me, next second they'd vanished deeper into the ventilation system, probably off on some grand adventure. Dr. Squeakerton had retrieved her tablet and was frantically typing notes. "This is fascinating," she muttered. "Human parental instincts appear to extend across species barriers, even to apex predator offspring. The subject demonstrates protective behavior toward young that could theoretically pose a significant threat to—" "Doctor," Officer Blunt interrupted in a strangled whisper, "maybe now isn't the time for your research." "Where?" Vex said, advancing on Jake with the deliberate pace of an approaching natural disaster. "Did you last see them heading?" Jake, to his credit, didn't back down. He just tilted his head thoughtfully, like he was trying to remember where he'd left his car keys. "Let me think. They were heading toward the residential quarters, I think. Section D, maybe E. The air ducts connect pretty much everywhere in that part of the station." "Section D and E," Officer Blunt repeated, his fingers flying over his tablet. That's the human quarters." The room fell silent again, except for the sound of Vex's claws slowly extending. "The Cubs," Vex said with the kind of calm that preceded planet-wide evacuations, "are in the human quarters." "Looks that way," Jake agreed cheerfully. "Hope they're not causing too much trouble for whoever finds them first." What followed could only be described as the galaxy's most overqualified search party for 3 toddlers having a playdate. Vex had assembled a tactical team that could have taken down a small moon. 6 fully armed Krillian warriors, their scales gleaming black in combat mode, marched through the corridors of Station Omega-7 like they were heading into the final battle of the war. Their weapons were charged, their sensors were active, and their expressions suggested they expected to find evidence of the most heinous crime in galactic history. Behind them trailed Jake, still in his grease-stained coveralls, whistling what sounded suspiciously like a human lullaby. "This is highly irregular," Dr. Squickerton panted, struggling to keep up with the war party while juggling her scientific equipment. "Protocol clearly states that in cases of missing alien minors we should contact their species embassy first, then coordinate with local authorities, then—" "Protocol," Vex snarled without breaking stride, "did not account for human involvement." "Hey now," Jake protested mildly. "I didn't kidnap anybody. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Vex said, rounding on him so fast that the other Krillians instinctively reached for their weapons, "does not include allowing the Cubs of the Supreme War Chief to wander off into a section of the station populated by the galaxy's most unpredictable species." Jake considered this. "Okay, fair point, but in my defense, nobody ever mentioned they were VIP kids. They didn't have little name tags or anything." "VIP kids," one of the other warriors repeated in disbelief. "Yeah, you know, like when the captain's children visit the bridge, or the ambassador's family gets the fancy quarters. Special treatment protocols," Jake shrugged. "Though honestly, all kids are VIP kids if you think about it. Someone cares about them enough to worry when they go missing." The entire war party stopped walking. Even Dr. Squeakerton quit typing on her tablet. Officer Blunt, who had been trailing at the back of the group and hoping desperately that this would all turn out to be someone else's problem, made that deflating balloon sound again. "Did he just," one warrior whispered to another, "refer to War Chief Grimjaw's offspring as someone's kids?" "I think he did," the second warrior whispered back. "And suggest that humans consider all young to be equally valuable regardless of their parents' social status?" "Appears to be the implication, yes." Vex held up a clawed hand for silence. "We are approaching the residential quarters. Maintain formation. Expect anything." "Anything like what?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. Dr. Squeakerton cleared her throat nervously. "Well, human behavior regarding the young of other species is somewhat unpredictable. Historical records show instances of everything from adoption to ritualistic—" "They're kids, not artifacts," Jake interrupted. "Worst case scenario, someone's probably trying to figure out what they eat and whether they need a diaper change." The war party exchanged glances. In their experience, worst case scenarios involved considerably more bloodshed and significantly fewer diaper changes. They reached the entrance to Residential Section D, where a helpful directory listed the current occupants. Vex scanned the names with the intensity of a general studying battle plans. "Morrison, Jake, quarters, D7. "That's me," Jake confirmed helpfully. "Your quarters are the closest to the ventilation access point," Vex observed. "Well, yeah, I requested them specifically. Easier to respond to maintenance calls if I'm centrally located," Jake paused. "Plus, the rent's cheaper because of the noise from the air recyclers, but that doesn't bother me much." Vex's eyes narrowed to slits. How convenient. Look, if you think I'm running some kind of alien cub-napping operation out of my studio apartment, you're going to be really disappointed by my criminal mastermind setup, Jake said. Unless you count a hot plate and a fold-out couch as sophisticated kidnapping equipment. But Vex was already moving, his tactical team flowing around him like a perfectly choreographed dance of death. They approached Jake's modest quarters with the same caution they'd use for storming an enemy stronghold. On my mark, Vex whispered, positioning himself beside the door. Expect resistance. Jake rolled his eyes and started to reach for his door control, but 3 different warriors immediately trained their weapons on him. I was just going to unlock it for you, he said reasonably. It's my door. What happened next would be talked about in Krylean military academies for the next century, though the official reports would leave out most of the embarrassing details. Vex gave the signal. His tactical team moved with practiced precision. Shoulders tensed, weapons ready. Every sense focused on whatever horrors awaited them beyond that door. This was the moment they'd been training for their entire military careers, the confrontation with humanity's darkest nature, the rescue of innocent cubs from the clutches of an unpredictable apex predator species. The door slid open with a soft whisper. And there, sprawled across Jake's threadbare couch in what had to be the most anticlimactic discovery in galactic military history, was Jake himself. Fast asleep with 3 Krylean cubs using his chest as their personal sleeping platform. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the cargo bay 3 levels down. The cubs were purring, not the terrifying growl purr of adult Kryleans preparing for battle, but the soft, contented rumble that Krylean young made when they felt completely safe and utterly comfortable. Their tiny claws were kneaded gently into Jake's coveralls like miniature cats. Their scales had shifted to that peaceful blue-green color that meant deep, dreamless sleep. Jake's mouth was slightly open, one arm draped protectively around the smallest cub, the other resting on what appeared to be a makeshift blanket fort constructed from maintenance towels and spare uniform shirts. There was an empty bowl on the coffee table that smelled suspiciously like the fish sticks from the station cafeteria, and several small toys that looked like they'd been hastily fashioned from spare mechanical parts. Well, Officer Blunt whispered after approximately 17 years. That's not what I expected. Dr. Squeakerton's tablet fell out of her nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor, finally waking Jake, who blinked sleepily at the assembled war party crowding his doorway. Oh, hey guys, he mumbled, carefully not moving so as not to disturb his sleeping passengers. You found them. Good, he yawned. Sorry about the mess. They were pretty tired when they showed up and I didn't want to wake anyone to ask where they belonged. The largest of the cubs, who Vex now recognized as Spike, the most aggressive of the 3, stirred slightly and made a small chirping sound before burrowing deeper into Jake's armpit with a contented sigh. Vex stared. His elite warriors stared. Dr. Squeakerton stared while frantically trying to pick up her tablet without making noise. Officer Blunt stared and wondered if he was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Ewing showed up, Vex repeated slowly, like he was trying to translate an alien language. Yeah, about 2 hours ago. Came tumbling out of that air vent over there looking like they'd had quite an adventure. Jake nodded toward a grate that was indeed hanging open. Took me a while to figure out they were hungry. Turns out they love fish sticks. Who knew? You fed them, Vex said. Well, yeah. They were making those little sad chirping sounds and their tummies were rumbling. What was I supposed to do, let them go hungry? The second cub, a female that Vex recognized as Patches due to the distinctive scale pattern on her back, chose that moment to wake up. She lifted her tiny head, spotted the assembled Krylean war party, and made a pleased trilling sound before attempting to burrow even deeper into Jake's side. She's shy around strangers, Jake explained quietly, but she's got quite the personality once she warms up to you. Very curious about how things work. She helped me fix the temperature control in here. Helped you? Vex repeated. Yeah, she's got these tiny claws that can get into the really small spaces where the wiring connects. Very helpful. Jake smiled fondly at the drowsy cub, though I had to stop her from trying to eat the electrical components. Apparently they taste interesting, but I didn't think they'd be good for her digestion. The third cub, the smallest one, who Vex knew was called Nibbles for his tendency to bite everything at least once, was still deeply asleep with his head pillowed on Jake's shoulder. His tiny arms were wrapped around Jake's neck in what could only be described as a hug. This one's the snuggler, Jake continued in the same quiet voice. Took him about 10 minutes to decide I was acceptable furniture. He's been attached to me pretty much since they got here. Dr. Squeakerton finally managed to retrieve her tablet, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she was witnessing. This is impossible, she whispered. Krillian young only display this level of trust and bonding behavior with their immediate family members. The pheromone signatures alone should have... Maybe they just know I'm not gonna hurt them, Jake suggested reasonably. Kids are pretty good at reading people, even alien kids. Vex took a step forward, and all three cubs immediately lifted their heads to look at him. For a moment the apartment held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the galaxy's most feared predator offspring came face to face with their guardian. Spike chirped happily and waved one tiny claw. Patches trilled and tried to hide behind Jake's arm. Nibbles made a sleepy questioning sound and looked back and forth between Jake and Vex, like he was trying to figure out if this new person was friend or foe. "It's okay, guys," Jake said softly, his hand gently stroking Patch's scales. "That's Commander Vex. He's been looking for you. I bet he was really worried." And that, Vex realized with growing horror, was exactly what he had been. Worried. About three cubs who were apparently perfectly safe in the care of a human who had fed them fish sticks and built them a blanket fort and let them use him as a living pillow for their nap. "You," Vex said carefully, "were not supposed to be this competent." Jake blinked. "Thanks, I think." Dr. Squeakerton was having what could politely be called a complete academic meltdown. "Oh. This contradicts everything," she muttered, frantically scrolling through her research files while trying not to disturb the sleeping cubs. 17 years of xenobiological study, peer-reviewed papers, 3 doctoral dissertations on human behavioral patterns, and it's all wrong. All of it. She held up her tablet with a shaking hand, showing charts and graphs and complicated scientific diagrams that meant absolutely nothing to anyone else in the room. "Look at this data. Humans are supposed to be competitive pack hunters, territorial, aggressive toward the young of rival species. The testosterone levels alone should have triggered at least 12 different hostile responses." "Rival species?" Jake asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "Lady, they're babies. What am I gonna do, challenge them to a duel?" "But the evolutionary imperatives," Dr. Squeakerton wailed, completely ignoring Jake's question. "The resource competition, the biological imperative to eliminate potential threats to your own offspring." "I don't have any offspring," Jake pointed out reasonably. "And even if I did, I'm pretty sure 3 sleepy toddlers don't qualify as a threat to anything except maybe my couch cushions." Vex watched this exchange with growing fascination. In all his years of military service, he had encountered humans in battle, in negotiations, in trade disputes, and in diplomatic functions. He had read the intelligence reports, studied their tactics, analyzed their psychological profiles. Everything he knew about humanity suggested they were dangerous, unpredictable, and prone to violence when cornered. Nothing in those reports had prepared him for watching a human male gently untangle a cub's claw from his shirt fabric while explaining the nutritional value of fish sticks. "The pheromone signatures are all wrong, too," Dr. Squeakerton continued, now pacing in small circles and gesturing wildly with her tablet. "Krillian cubs release specific chemical markers when they are distressed, and humans should be interpreting those as either prey scents or territorial challenges. Instead, your cortisol levels appear to have dropped. Your oxytocin production has increased, and your protective instincts have activated, as if these were your own young." "Maybe," Jake said slowly, like he was explaining something very simple to someone very smart who was missing something very obvious. "That's because they are just young. Doesn't matter what species they come from. Young things need taking care of." The room fell silent except for the soft purring of the cubs and the distant hum of the station's air recyclers. Squeakerton whispered, "That's not how evolution works." "Yeah, well," Jake shrugged as best he could with 3 alien toddlers draped across his torso. "Evolution never had to deal with air conditioning and artificial gravity and 27 different species all trying to live together on the same space station. Maybe we're all just making it up as we go along." One of Vex's warriors, a scarred veteran named Claw, who had fought in the Battle of Xerion Prime, cleared his throat nervously. "Commander, if I may, when my own cubs were this age, they used to climb all over me the same way after their afternoon feeding. It's actually quite normal behavior." Another warrior nodded. "My youngest used to fall asleep on my chest after playtime, said it was the best napping spot because of the heartbeat." Vex turned to stare at his soldiers, who were now looking at the sleeping cubs with expressions that were decidedly less military and significantly more paternal. "You're telling me," Vex said slowly, "that this human has accidentally replicated optimal Krillian childcare protocols." "Well," Jake said thoughtfully, "I wouldn't call it accidental. When something small and helpless shows up at your door, you feed it, make sure it's safe, and let it sleep somewhere warm. That's pretty much universal, isn't it? Dr. Squeakerton's tablet slipped from her nerveless fingers again. Universal, she repeated faintly. I mean, doesn't matter if it's a puppy, a kitten, a baby bird, or apparently a baby space lizard, Jake continued. The basics are the same: food, safety, comfort. Show them they're welcome, and they'll probably stick around until someone comes looking for them. Space lizard, Vex repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Sorry, is that offensive? I don't really know the proper terminology for your species. The cubs seemed okay with it when I was talking to them earlier, but maybe they're too young to care about political correctness. You were talking to them, Vex said. Well, yeah. Kids like it when you talk to them, even if they don't understand all the words. Helps them feel less scared in a new place. Jake glanced down at Nibbles, who was still clinging to his neck like a tiny scaly koala. Plus, this little guy seemed really interested in learning how the comm system works, so I was explaining the basic relay protocols while I was fixing the temperature control. You were teaching Krelian military technology to a cub, one of the warriors said in disbelief. I was teaching basic electronics to a curious kid, Jake corrected. There's a difference, though he's got a real aptitude for it. Picked up the principles way faster than most of the adult engineers I've worked with. Officer Blunt, who had been standing in the doorway this entire time looking like he was watching a nature documentary about alien species he'd never heard of, finally found his voice. So, you're telling me that the missing cubs weren't kidnapped, weren't in danger, and weren't being held against their will? They just wandered over here for a playdate and a nap? Pretty much, Jake agreed. Though I think they were mostly looking for food. Growing cubs probably need a lot of calories. A playdate? Vex said, testing the human word like it might explode in his mouth. Yeah, you know. Kids hanging out, having fun, getting into harmless mischief. Jake smiled as Patches stirred and made a soft, questioning chirp. These guys are great company, actually, very polite house guests. They even helped clean up their toys when they were done playing. Vex looked around the small apartment and realized that Jake was right. Despite 3 energetic cubs spending several hours exploring the space, everything was remarkably neat and organized. The makeshift toys were stacked in a corner, the blanket fort was constructed with military precision, and the only real evidence of their presence was the lingering smell of fish sticks and the contented purring of 3 well-fed, well-rested cubs. In summary, Dr. Squeakerton said in a voice that suggested her entire worldview was crumbling, instead of displaying any of the 43 documented human responses to encountering unknown alien juveniles, you simply took care of them, like any responsible adult would take care of any child. Here's the problem, Winter, said. What else was I gonna do? 3 weeks later, Jake Morrison had officially become the most unlikely person in galactic history to receive a commendation from the Krelian Empire. Of course, nobody was calling it a commendation. The official paperwork described it as a recognition of adequate interspecies cooperation protocols, which Jake figured was probably the Krelian equivalent of a participation trophy. But it came with a pay raise and an official exemption from having his quarters inspected during routine security sweeps, so he wasn't complaining. What he was complaining about was the new lock on his door. I still don't understand why you installed this thing, Jake said, examining the heavy-duty biometric scanner that Vex had personally supervised the installation of 3 days earlier. It's got more security features than the armory. It's not to keep you in, Vex replied, watching with poorly concealed amusement as Jake struggled with the palm reader for the 3rd time that morning. It's to keep them out. As if summoned by the mention of their names, a familiar scratching sound echoed from the air vent above Jake's couch. 3 pairs of bright yellow eyes peered down through the grate, followed by a chorus of disappointed chirping when they realized their favorite human was still inside his apartment, but the door was locked. They've figured out 17 different routes through the ventilation system to reach your quarters, Vex continued, consulting a tablet that Officer Blunt had provided after conducting what he optimistically called a comprehensive security audit of the station's ductwork. Yesterday, they managed to activate the emergency fire suppression system, trying to access the shortcut through engineering. Jake sighed and finally got the door open. Come on down, guys, but wipe your claws first. I just cleaned the couch. 3 small bodies tumbled out of the vent with the practiced ease of tiny acrobats, immediately swarming Jake like he was the most interesting playground equipment in the galaxy. Spike had grown noticeably in the past 3 weeks and was now sporting the beginnings of proper combat scales, though he still insisted on using Jake's shoulder as his preferred observation post. Patches had developed an alarming fascination with electronics and was already eyeing Jake's maintenance toolkit with obvious intent. Nibbles remained the snuggler of the group, wrapping himself around Jake's leg like a scaly hug while purring loud enough to be heard in the next room. "I thought War Chief Grimjaw was coming back soon," Jake said, gently detaching Nibbles so he could sit down without squashing anyone. "Shouldn't they be getting ready to go home?" Vex's expression shifted to what Jake had learned was the Krillian equivalent of embarrassment. "The War Chief has been delayed. Her campaign in the Outer Rim has been more successful than anticipated. She may not return for another month." "Ah," Jake nodded knowingly. "So you're stuck babysitting for longer than expected." "I am responsible for their welfare and education during her absence," Vex corrected stiffly. "Right, babysitting." Jake scratched behind Patch's ear spikes, earning a delighted trill. "How's that working out for you?" The truth was, it wasn't working out well at all. Despite being one of the most feared military commanders in the galaxy, Vex had discovered that his leadership skills did not translate effectively to managing 3 energetic cubs who had no respect for authority, military hierarchy, or the concept of scheduled nap time. His attempts to maintain discipline had resulted in Spike challenging him to what could only be described as a tiny roaring contest every morning, Patches systematically dismantling everything electronic in their quarters to see how it worked, and Nibbles developing separation anxiety whenever Vex left their line of sight for more than 5 minutes. It had been Officer Blunt, of all people, who had finally suggested that maybe the cubs kept escaping to visit Jake because Jake's quarters were more fun than the sterile military housing they'd been assigned. "Lieutenant, I hate to disappoint you, but the Baglin theory does not seem up to his squeaker-bigger task. Dr. Squeakerton believes it may be related to imprinting behavior, though her current theories about human-Krillian psychological compatibility are still evolving." Dr. Squeakerton had spent the past 3 weeks essentially rewriting her entire field of study. Her new research papers bore titles like Interspecies Caregiving, a reevaluation of human nurturing instincts, and The Universal Nature of Parental Behavior Across Sentient Species. She'd also started what she called observational studies of Jake's interactions with the cubs, which mostly involved her lurking in corners with her tablet, frantically taking notes and muttering things like "fascinating" and "completely unprecedented" whenever Jake did something particularly normal, like making sure the cubs washed their claws before eating, or teaching them how to play simple games. "So what you're saying," Jake said, carefully extracting his maintenance scanner from Patch's curious claws before she could take it apart, "is that you need a babysitter for your babysitting job." "I need," Vex said with the dignity of someone who commanded a fleet of starships and had never in his life imagined he would be negotiating childcare arrangements, "assistance with maintaining appropriate recreational activities for developing cubs." Jake grinned. "You need a babysitter." "Do not," Vex warned. "Let that term appear in any official reports." "Wouldn't dream of it." Jake looked down at the 3 cubs who had arranged themselves around his living room like they owned the place. Spike was investigating the contents of a toolbox, Patches was attempting to redesign Jake's coffee maker, and Nibbles was constructing what appeared to be a nest out of maintenance towels. Though I have to say, they're probably learning more practical skills here than they would in whatever formal education program you guys have set up. This was, unfortunately, absolutely true. In the past 3 weeks, the cubs had learned basic electronics repair, elementary mechanical engineering, introductory plumbing, and what Jake called essential life skills, like cooking simple meals, cleaning up after themselves, and the proper way to apologize when you accidentally broke something important. They had also mastered 17 different human games, learned to recognize 12 different types of music, and developed an inexplicable fondness for ancient Earth cartoons that Jake had downloaded from the station's entertainment database. "There may," Vex said carefully, "be some value in allowing them to continue their current educational program." "You mean letting them hang out here while you do whatever scary military stuff you do during the day," Jake translated. "I mean providing them with access to alternative learning opportunities that may prove beneficial to their development," Vex corrected. "Right." "Babysitting." Jake stood up, gently relocating Nibbles to the couch. "Well, I guess I can officially add interspecies childcare provider to my resume. Though I'm gonna need a bigger apartment if this keeps up. And maybe some actual toys instead of just letting them play with spare machine parts." "Then can be arranged," Vex said quickly. Perhaps too quickly. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You've already arranged it, haven't you?" "The quartermaster has been instructed to provide whatever resources you deem necessary for the cubs' continued welfare and education," Vex admitted. "Within reason." "And the bigger apartment?" "Is currently being prepared 2 levels down. It features reinforced ventilation grates, child-safe environmental controls, and direct access to maintenance corridors for your convenience. Jake stared at him. You've been planning this for weeks. I have been preparing for various contingencies, Vex said with the air of someone who definitely had not spent the last 3 weeks desperately trying to figure out how to manage 3 hyperactive cubs without losing his mind. The cubs' well-being is my primary concern. Jake looked around his small apartment, where 3 alien toddlers were now engaged in what appeared to be a collaborative construction project involving his entire collection of spare electronic components. And what happens when War Chief Grimjaw gets back and finds out her kids have been spending their days with a human maintenance worker instead of receiving proper military education? Vex's expression shifted to something that might have been a smile if Krillian's had been capable of expressions that didn't look vaguely homicidal. The War Chief's exact words when I reported the situation were, and I quote, "If the human can keep them alive, educated, and tired enough to sleep through the night, give him whatever he wants and a medal." She said that? She may have used slightly more colorful language, Vex admitted, but the sentiment was clear. Jake looked down at the cubs, who had apparently decided that his coffee maker would work better if they added more blinking lights to it, and shook his head in amazement. "So let me get this straight," he said. "I accidentally become the unofficial nanny to the 3 most important toddlers in the Krillian Empire, completely by accident, just by doing what any reasonable person would do when they find lost kids." "Appears to be an accurate summary of events," Vex agreed. "And instead of being executed for corrupting alien youth or whatever, I'm getting a promotion, a bigger apartment, and official recognition from a species that most of the galaxy is terrified of." "Also an accurate summary." Jake considered this for a moment, watching Patches successfully install a tiny disco ball into his coffee maker while her brothers cheered encouragement. "You know what?" he said finally. "I think I can live with that." From the air vent above, the sound of scratching claws and muffled giggling suggested that the cubs had discovered a new route to explore. Jake sighed, grabbed his toolkit, and prepared for another day of the most rewarding job he'd never applied for. After all, somebody had to make sure those disco lights were properly wired.